Captain Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew. We have our usual suspects of AD or Alpha Dean. We have Spigs18 or Anthony. And a quick reminder, if you haven't hit that follow or subscribe button, it'll do wonders to help our channel and it'll help us bring you more great content. And Dean, what are we doing here today?
Well, guys, we haven't had one of these good old, back and forth, in a while, but not since like last week when me and Anthony were getting ready to fight, You guys want to see us fight on screen virtually? It'd be awesome. But anyway,
we have a good back and forth.
Haven't had a good back and forth since last week. So what we're doing today, guys, we decided to sit down. It's been a lot of talk on the server. And it was about adversarial GMs, player versus the GM, that mindset. And basically we're going to see if it still has a place, if it, what's it about, talk a little bit about the history and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Anthony get us right into it.
Yeah, it's pretty much like what Dean said. This week there was a great discussion on the Cypher Unlimited Discord about adversarial GMs. Everyone's experience with that play style from either from the player perspective or the GM perspective. So it got us thinking about the term, right? Adversarial GM. And what exactly does it mean? Because I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So we're going to kind of try to touch on that. And, we hope to try to define it in, in our terms, I guess, in our opinion. What's the origin of this like play style and mindset? Are there any redeeming qualities for playing this way? Of course, and of course, is there still a place for adversarial gameplay in modern RPGs like the Cypher System, which is, something we should definitely talk about. Yeah, and last but not least, we want to hear everybody. We'd love to hear everybody's opinions on this matter because, we're just three idiots that talk about gaming. We're in no way claiming to be experts. So if we say anything wrong, get any facts wrong, be sure to tell us because, that's what we want. We appreciate it. So I guess to kick off this conversation, the first thing I'm going to ask you guys is, what is exactly is an adversarial GM in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll give a quick answer because I actually, you guys who frequent the channel know I'm more of a newer player, so I actually didn't really experience much of this stuff firsthand, just mostly through stories and, etc. But either way, what my understanding is adversarial GM is someone, the GM who plays the role of almost like the boss of the game. Like it's the player's job to overcome the GM, not necessarily the game, but it's more of that mindset. I'm going to take down everything you're throwing at me as the player. And the GM in this scenario is putting out obstacles, not necessarily trying to tell a collaborative story as much as we're used to. It's more of, hey, I'm gonna drop these really difficult obstacles in front of you, challenges to try to potentially maybe kill you. Yeah, and then in this situation, it's more of it almost feels like a video game mindset where you're trying to beat one another instead of trying to tell a story together.
Well, Al, you basically hit the nail on the head. I could add a bunch more to it. I mean, again, it's all about perspectives and everything else, and for me, it just goes back to the history of of gaming then in of itself.
Before you go into that rabbit hole, let's just do the definition first.
But that's what I'm saying. That's the only way I can give a good definition for me. So I'll hold off until we decide to jump in the rabbit hole. But basically what Al said, and then some more stuff.
To me, I think there's the adversary. I think there's two definitions of adversarial GM that gets floated around most commonly. I think the one I grew up with was us. Pretty much what the definition is. What Al said: us against the GM. My job is to create scenarios with a high probability of failure for the players. That I'm not trying to tell a collaborative story. I'm trying to give you as difficult tasks as I possibly can with the hopes of killing the party. And my satisfaction comes from accomplishing those tasks as a GM. Yeah, right. Then I think the more modern version of, if this makes any sense, I could be entirely wrong, but this is just how I interpret it. I think the more modern version of adversarial GM now is the GM that doesn't give agency to the player whatsoever and wants full control of the narrative, as opposed to the older adversarial GM, the first edition D&D didn't give a fuck about the narrative to begin with. So it wasn't about control over the story. It was more about control over killing the players. But I think now the modern version of adversarial GM is the GM that the players are only there to take part in the GM story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And once the players try to cross that line, the GM becomes more and more punishing for crossing the line and wanting agency as a player. Am I making any sense, guys, or am I talking
Absolutely.
about
And I think you're definitely on the right path. I think we all agree that from before and and now both definitions work. And like I said, in order to kind of understand it from the past, I think you do really need a little history, a little perspective. So,
which leads us into our next question on the show notes, Dean, which I'll let you run wild now. How did this style of gameplay originate?
Well, I'm going to give you guys a little history lesson, then I'm going to shut my mouth and we're going to talk about it. But seriously, this is what it is. You got to remember that Dungeons and Dragons, RPGs in of themselves were spawned from tabletop simulation games, wargaming, which found its birth, of course, from things like chess and Go. A lot of people don't know that, probably the grandfather to RPGs would be considered H.G. Wells, because he was one of the first people to come up with wargaming concepts and so on and so forth. But that being said, Dungeons and Dragons was basically formulated with the idea of adding these extra elements to these war games. So, instead of it just being two armies, oh, look, let's put a dragon in. Oh, look, let's put, some elves in here. Let's add environmental things. So all of those things added to it. And so it still was a game where you had one person, as the adversary to the other side of the table. Thus being the adversarial GM, the players versus the GM ideology. And that's even how the rules were written for years. The rules were literally written in a way that you felt as if you were in a competition between yourself and your players. And that's kind of why the story didn't matter.
Also, first of all, me and Dean grew up in this era. Dean was there from the beginning of time. He was there when Moses had the tablets. I actually moved into the neighborhood a couple years later, but I caught the end of first edition D&D, right? Dean is absolutely right? But I think it's important to mention and take into account that this wasn't a negative thing. Like, I know it's viewed negative now, but at the time, right, this was just how role-playing was.
Yep.
Like if you look at all the early modules and adventures, the Tomb of Horrors, they were adversarial GMs, like Bible on how to kill freaking players. Like all the early edition modules were designed to, hey, look, here's a bunch of obstacles you throw at these idiots and try to kill as many people as you possibly can. So it wasn't necessarily a negative thing. It wasn't till later on when different styles of games came out and people started really caring about the actual story being told, that the term adversarial GM started, coming out. Because at first it was us against the GM.
Right.
And
if you looked at, like you said, the modules, the way the modules are written, prime example would be just the module, the rebirth of the module, Echoes from the Night Below that we played. You see how difficult that was set up. That was set up for the GM to really be, the DM to be able to trounce the players, and that's how most games are set up. Just like, we had a point where if you put a puzzle into the game or a trap or something, there was one way and one way only to disarm that trap. There was only one answer to that puzzle, whereas the evolution of gaming, we as GMs, if the players come up with a good idea and it works, sure, that may not have been the answer you wrote down originally, but it is now.
Yo, Dean, you're moving ahead on the but I think another important aspect to actually mention is that player characters weren't as important to the players as they are, like your individual character you're playing, right? Like now, you take pride in the character. I'm not saying that we didn't take pride in the characters we had in first edition, right? But they were viewed more as expendable, like in a video game. Like if you played a video game, you got 9 lives. Like, I mean, it wasn't uncommon in the early 80s to show up to a game session with a folder of 5 or 6 characters.
Absolutely.
Like that wasn't an unheard of type of thing. I remember when I first played Tomb of Horrors, I was told to have 6 characters ready.
If you remember correctly, it wasn't until 10th level or so that you became attached to a character. Up to 10th level is like, if he died, he died.
Yeah, we're not trying to like defend the adversarial GM concept. All we're trying to say is that, hey, it wasn't the mindset of early players back then. Like I think that, which we'll touch on a little later, but I think as the hobby grew and as the audience expanded to more creators and more people became GMs, and different companies came out with different concepts, that everyone started viewing it a little differently, right? So with that said, it came from early wargaming, and that was the mindset. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good. It was just, that's how you played, and like every other game, every game evolves.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a RPG or something along those lines, definitely. You got to look at the evolution of these things.
So I guess this leads into our next question, right? What are some of the factors that make a GM or game group play this way?
Oh, I can answer this one pretty easily, even though again it was kind of an error I missed, an era I missed. It just harks back to that like video game feeling. I want to max min my character or characters, because you're in a party. You would obviously talk to your party members on how you want to max min in this like adversarial situation, and the GM will derive pleasure in putting out these obstacles that should be extremely challenging to the point of almost killing the party. And that's where the fun lies in hard video games, where you're going to take on this hard challenge. You're most likely will die because it's so hard, but that's part of the challenge. Specifically, it's funny, we're talking about this offline. We're like roguelites or rogues, like games like Rogue, where it's extremely challenging. You're going to have a really hard time, and if you make one mistake, that's it. You start, the character's gone, game over, start over. Like, and it's that sort of same mindset. It's like, you want to see if you can actually overcome the obstacle and survive and level up and see the end game, quote unquote. Like, have that character see more game, quote unquote.
And I mean, and I would not disagree one little bit. And I would also say that, again, it was the rules is written. You were literally setting up 2 sides of the table. You were setting up the game board, so everybody could do their thing. The game master had to come up with, the dungeon master had to come up with, lots of obstacles to challenge the players. And they should get progressively harder as time goes on. So the end game, and then you were talking about min-maxing. That's another great point. Min-max is like the crux of that GM versus player mindset.
I would like to respectfully disagree on that.
Okay.
I've become a nicer Anthony today. I use the word respectfully disagree. The reason I don't think it's the crux, I think min-maxing is an after effect of adversarial GMing. I think that adversarial GMing led players to want to min-max. You know, because I think that the concept of it's so difficult, the GM is making it so difficult for me. Next time I'm gonna create a character, I'm gonna create a character that has all the answers to whatever the GM had. You know, it like came after the fact. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. Like I think the whole concept of min-maxing came from the adversarial GM.
Let me chime in here for a second, just real quick, because I think this might kind of stem or cut the conversation. But either way, it's kind of like that chicken and the egg thing, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as a player or a GM got their hands on this material, depending on their mindset, they were already min-maxing before they even sat at a table. So like, it had nothing to do with seeing the challenges put forth by a GM. It's just their mindset.
Yeah,
And again,
I agree with you from second edition on, but first edition you didn't have much character options to min-max.
Well, but you got to think about you didn't
If you
have
say
many,
so, I wasn't there.
you didn't have, and that's what I'm saying. But it all stemmed from the original, because even like with miniature gaming, you want to optimize your army against the other team.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right, Dean.
So that's
From that point of view, yeah, I totally agree with you.
So that's what I'm saying. It all came about. And what happened is first edition, you're right. There were not a lot of options because they were options that were being added to the idea of what most people don't realize is like the player characters that we play in wargaming when it was first introduced, these were captains. These were captains of your armies and so on and so forth. So they actually had additional abilities. Then Dungeons and Dragons was born, and guess what? These additional abilities are just added onto these frameworks, and it wasn't so much. But then the game Dungeon Master had all the extra stuff to add against you. So, like Anthony said, by second edition, options came about. AD&D came about. There were options, and the min-maxing began on the opposite side of the screen.
All right, so let's view it then from let's now. So we don't get hop on constantly talking about first and second edition. What are some of the factors that now creates an adversarial GM? You know, like in this current age, regardless of what system you're playing, as opposed to, you know, in that case, I definitely agree with you that players have more input in creating an adversarial game because of min-maxing. I agree with you on that point for sure. Dave.
Well, so
but what are some of the other factors that makes a game group or a GM turn into an adversarial GM in like a modern game setting?
Okay, and again,
not modern as in the genre, modern as in today.
Yeah, I understand. So again, I think that's a two-side thing, like we were talking earlier, that adversarial GM, the word adversarial GM gets used incorrectly sometimes, because just because you're an asshole does not make you an adversarial GM. You're just an asshole. But an adversarial GM is that GM who still has that mindset about me versus the players, and I'm going to control my game. He's kind of a railroady type GM who has a vision, and your characters need to be on that path. And you know that can breed adversary.
I understand that, dude. We're defining it, but like I'm curious in what leads to that. You know, like. We know what the definition is, but why is it happening? Like, you know, like, is it just a personal preference? Like somebody's just, you know, that's the way they think, or they, like, I'm just, you know, just creating, or the other variables that creates a game table to become adversarial. You understand? Again, I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
So, I get what you're saying. Go ahead, Al.
No, so what Anthony's really asking here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is what causes a game table to become adversarial like unintentionally without the group discussing it, like it just sort of happens?
I think that's how it normally happens. Or like, I don't think no one sets up and go, yo, we're gonna be adversarial shit, dude. Like I don't think the players are like,
ideally it should go like that though. It should be agreed upon, hey, we're gonna play this like an adversarial style game where it's going to be y'all versus me, min-max, do whatever y'all need to do to overcome what I'm gonna throw at you. I think that's perfectly a valid way to approach role-playing games if that's what you want to do. It's nothing wrong with it, but again, it has to be, it was mentioned in the chat earlier by Claire, it has to be agreed upon. It can't, and again, some games can just naturally devolve into adversarial. But
I do
yeah,
think,
I think it should be agreed upon.
and I'm with you, Al, on that. I think a lot of times it's where you found your start. I think it's also the type of game you're playing, depending on how that game is built. You know, the game system sometimes will denote or influence that type of thought process. If you're stepping into gaming and the first thing you step into is Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse games or Cypher System, you're going to have a different mindset because that game is feeding you that. Whereas if you look at Dungeons and Dragons, you know, and you look at even Savage Worlds, which is much more narrative in its ideology, but the way characters are built, when the GM and the players are doing the same thing, you know, on you know opposite sides of the screen, it becomes a bit of a competition because as a GM, I'm like, wait a minute, I got to make some characters that they're not going to trounce. They just got to walk all over my characters. And you're not trying to be adversarial. You're just trying to make sure the challenge is there, but it does become a bit of a competition. Who can make the
Dean, I think you brought up that is an excellent point. You know, I think that's one of the main variables is when you started out playing an indie game, and most of those indie games are not even indie, might not be the right term, but when you started out playing in narrative-based games, you're nurtured with a different mindset as opposed to playing a lot more of the tactical games. So that definitely affects the way a table. I would also like to add that the average age of your group, because I know that the younger the table, the more competitive it is between, because I know the 15-year-old me wanted to be, wanted my character to shine the most. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about the overall story. The 15-year-old me GM wasn't thinking about the overall enjoyment of the group, was thinking about wanting to be able to say, hey, I created this kick-ass dragon. You saw, it took your, like I was literally out to stump the players or literally out to impress the players with my, so-called 15-year-old GM chops. So I'll also like to add that the overall age and maturity of the group could also direct how adversarial your table is.
And to add one other thing to that, because I think that's an excellent point too, and one other thing I'd like to add to that is also what you're consuming as well. What is your fantasy consumption? Are you reading, full-blown fantasy novels at that time, or are you just watching anime? Are you just reading, Marvel comics, or are you, reading, Nine Princes in Amber, stuff like that, from when we were coming up. These all factored into the type of GM, or game or dungeon master I was. And now the same thing happens. I sit down and watch a movie and it's like, oh man, that would be a badass one shot. What can we do? Do I want it comical? Do I want it serious? All of those type things. And basically also seeing what your players are going to add back in. So,
I mean, what it boils down to, what Al said earlier, and I think Claire said it in chat as well, is about having that discussion, because I do think it's going to lead into my next question, but I do think that the adversarial table isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all.
And I think that it gets confused a lot, like what we mentioned earlier. So my next question for you guys is pretty straightforward, right? Is there a difference between being an adversarial GM and a GM who creates difficult challenges for a play group? Because I think the latter sometimes gets confused.
So I think the main difference is, again, if there was that discussion beforehand, if they all coming to that table with that mindset of, hey, we're going to play an adversarial type game where it's going to be us versus you, blah, whatever, right? But if the GM is ramping up difficulty of challenges, whatever, like encounters, whatever, if they're doing it with like a malicious intent without really telling them like, I'm gonna, I know you love your cat, I'm gonna fucking kill that shit so hard. Like, it depends. Like, it really depends on the GM's intent behind the difficulty. What is the difference there?
Right. Well, again, like I said, an adversarial GM and a GM who creates difficult challenges for play group, to me, are one and the same. Because regardless of how you look at it, if you're just being adversarial, if you're just there for the competition between the two sides. The other thing that we said earlier, are you an asshole? Are you a whole ass running games? That's the question. Because people like that, people who don't want to, who don't like any give and take, with the players, people who, you know, I was actually looking at a D&D chat the other day, and the guy was saying how they were 10th level or 8th level characters. They got put up against, a CR10 creature, and they did like 300 points of damage to it, then did another 200, and GMs, just kept saying, no, it's not dead. It's not dead. It regenerated. It did this, To me, that's being an ass. You're cheating because your players, outdid you, and you can't accept that.
But there's also, like, I know Brilliant Loser mentioned the Zombie Apocalypse game, which are games that I tend to like to run. And there's nothing wrong with those high lethality, high, quick chance of death.
No,
those games, have a without being an adversarial GM. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between creating difficult challenges and being a dick.
Yeah, so Claire put it very well in the chat, just before I lose it in the chat here. There's a difference between a game that has high difficulty and one where the GM is intentionally creating challenges to punish the player. That's
absolutely
nail on the head. So, big example of that. Oh, go on. Sorry, continue.
I was just saying what, kind of chime in what Anthony said. If you sit down to a zombie apocalypse game and you're playing normal people, then you've already agreed. You to me, that's a contract saying, okay, I know the possibility of death exists. That's why we had, like in your games, that's why we had like 14 characters or 20 characters listed on the side. So everybody had that chance that if you got bit, you knew you were done. And that was part of the contract. So just like,
it's like the modern day adversarial GM isn't necessarily like out to kill you. I think now the modern day adversarial GM is out to take away your agency, if that makes any
that does make a lot of sense.
I would say in the sense that because again, there could be a positive and negative adversarial. This is more of like the very jerk kind, like the one that's not, you didn't talk about it, you're just kind of doing it, just to throw that in there. But yeah, you're 100% correct there.
Because I think that I'm making stuff difficult for you, and challenges sometimes gets confused. Like I'll hear somebody describe something, right, and they'll be like, "Oh, my GM wasn't fair, because blah 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 happened," or we rolled 3 runs in a row and the dragon killed us. That's not an adversarial GM. That's you got crappy dice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just happens that way.
Adversarial GM is I rolled a natural 20 and the dragon somehow didn't take any damage and then burn me to bits after the fact. That's an adversarial GM. But you rolling horrible is you got shitty dice, dude. That's not the GM's fault.
Welcome, Eric.
Yeah, speaking of adversarial GMing, we got Eric Frankhouse in the house. Oh man, but
like I said, and it is, to me, it's like you said, it's literally, what are we doing when we walk through the door? Mm-hmm. Don't tell me I'm getting ready to sit down and play this great interactive story, player agency, GM, we working together to tell this grand epic. And every time I try to do something, like if we're going to talk about it from the Cypher System perspective, and every time I try to do something, you're trying to throw a GM intrusion at me. you know, to screw me over. You know,
Yeah.
that's not cool.
Another really good example would be the GM, and again, this is like the jerk kind of adversarial situation where, and we'll use Cypher System as an example, is the easiest to explain. If you look at, if this GM is looking at the character's inabilities and just constantly throwing things that have like the whole game is just like, for example, a character has an inability at swimming. It's it's not an underwater game, but this session is completely underwater or so. Like in that situation, they're throwing specific negatives at them because they know they can't deal with them properly, and they're just bombarding them with it. That would be a jerk adversarial GM.
Eric asked if we're going to talk about the pros of adversarial GMing and what you call it, brilliant. You said just the cons. Not really, because our very next question is
yeah, it's a good segue.
What are the redeeming qualities of this play style?
Well, first of all, if everybody at the table has agreed upon it and that's what they're there for, it's awesome. It's a blast to play. It's a fun time. You know, you get to test your character builds. You get to, you know, have those glory moments as long as, you know, everybody's on the same accord. That's a great boon to this play style. And you know what to expect. You know, there's no unfamiliar territory that you're going to cross. You know, you're going to be hit with puzzles. You know, you're going to be hit with, you know, tough ass bad guys. You know that the environment might be a problem. You got it down. You walk through the door like totally prepared.
Yeah. First of all, we talked about this a little bit offline yesterday, me and Dean, though. But if there wasn't adversarial GMing in the very beginning, we would have never had puzzles and traps. Nope. We would have never had dungeons, because all those concepts came from the adversarial mindset. So without the adversarial GMing style, role-playing would have been way different. If we're being honest with ourselves, you know, the whole concept of puzzles and traps came from the I gotcha player mindset from the very beginning.
Hey, Seth Monkey in the chat made a great statement. He said, if you can't take the heat, then they shouldn't be playing Cyberpunk. Direct quote from Cyberpunk Red.
I mean, yeah, so it's definitely the redeeming qualities, like Dean said, is, again, you get to really, depending on, again, you all have to be on board with this and whatnot, you can really test the boundaries of a system's mechanics and whatnot. You can see what works extremely well, what doesn't, and it lets the GM, again, as long as everyone's on board, they can tool some crazy custom baddies and see how it actually plays out in battle, whether they wipe the whole party easily, if they could take it. It becomes a really fun game of experimentation where you're throwing heavier and heavier stuff at this team that's trying to become stronger and stronger through manipulating mechanics or something like that. It could definitely be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the narrative, not only is it just like the obstacles, but the narrative could get more intense, could get more lethal. The group storytelling could go in weird direct. You could have adversarial competition, not only between the GM and players, but between the players themselves against each other. You know, it becomes a competition. Monster hunting, you know, cyberpunk, you know, post-apocalyptic, horror, all those games lend well to adversarial table that could, you know, really enhance the narrative.
Most definitely, especially in games where resources are limited, things like that. Like, it could definitely ramp up drama between the. And yeah, I've even seen it in games at home where I don't even throw things at them, and they're just adversarial because they want to be. They just throw themselves in a situation. Sometimes it plays out just like that. They just want to do it. You don't even have to set up a situation. They'll just cause the situation themselves. It's hilarious and amazing.
That, and like and Anthony brought up some things like we were saying. I would say, particular games that are like that. One game that comes to mind that was always adversarial, that's always players versus the GM, and it's always a lot of fun. And that's Paranoia.
Oh yeah.
Paranoia, basically literally you spent your time trying to screw over the computer and survive and you would screw over your other players to survive. It was great. It was a lot of fun, but that was, of course, an agreed upon. That was a contract that you knew going in.
Oh, we definitely got to stream a paranoia game. We've been saying that for the longest time.
I still haven't played it.
We can do paranoia Cypher style. It's easy. Very.
I mean,
easy.
I like the paranoia rules themselves as well. You know,
Yeah,
like the up-to-date paranoia is really good. Like the latest
yeah,
edition.
because it's kind of like the up to date. It's kind of like what was that game? Oh my God, Fiasco. It's kind of like Fiasco, which is kind of crazy.
Well, either way, I'd be down. We definitely don't really partake too much in that adversarial style here, and it's definitely fun.
I mean, you see, I think it has like I keep on harping this, but I think like the adversarial has like this negative connotation that doesn't necessarily fit. Like I think it's it's like one of those terms that gets used for everything. Like, oh, I didn't have a good time. He was adversarial GM. Oh, my table was a bunch of min-maxers. It was adversarial table. You know what I mean? Like it gets used. Sometimes it gets overused.
Right. And what people have to say, I mean, I think that's the difference. I think that we need to start having a discussion before you sit down at the table. What are your expectations at the end of the day? What kind of game are you looking for? Don't even talk about the genre or the characters. Let's just talk about the game you want to play, holistically. And if you can answer those questions, then I think people have a much better time. Because especially with the era we live in, it's not like you're just playing with a bunch of your friends anymore. We're playing online. We play with strangers. We meet people. It's a different time.
All right, so this wasn't in our notes, but I'm gonna ask this because I think everyone, even in chat, if you guys do you guys have any instances where you had this was absolutely an adversarial GM, like a story to tell?
Like unintentionally, like someone, like it wasn't priorly discussed and it just kind of happened?
No, like you see, I'm not so sure if the answer of having the discussion, like a session zero or talking about it beforehand, is what an adversarial GM is. Like you can have all the discussions in the world, but if somebody is adversarial in a session zero, he's not going to say, yo, I'm here to screw you over. Do you still want to play with me?
Right.
They still got,
all right, so there are extremes either way, but I'm of the mindset that, again, it should be discussed. And if you're just going to be adversarial at the table without saying it, it kind of makes you just a jerk GM, not an adversarial GM. You're just a jerk. There's a difference here to me. Again, you might label it as adversarial. I just think you're being an asshole. You're an asshole GM, not an adversarial. Adversarial comes with, again, that sort of agreed upon mindset that you're gonna have again, you can call it adversarial, but in this term of the labeling of a GM, I think it's kind of hard because there's no other like big label for this kind of a jerk asshole GM, so we all fall back to adversarial.
Let me tell you my story, so you what you call it, so you see where my frame of reference was. I know I told you this story before. I might have told you when we first started getting back heavy into role-playing games, and we were playing a lot of Pathfinder, and I wanted to get my fix. So I went to Roll20 and started just joining like random games, right? This is before we even started like posting games on Roll20 and started, doing our own thing. I was just joining every random game I could possibly, I was playing like 2 or 3 games a week on Roll20 with just randoms, right? And I joined this D&D session and I created a bard, and the person, I don't know if you guys ever do the Roll20, these people ask for like which I think is kind of ridiculous, but they want to fully interview you for a one shot.
Yep.
So I thought this guy, first of all, I don't know if it was Guy, Gal, or Day, whoever they were. I thought they must have been like a phenomenal GM because they had like a 20 questionnaire asking me my experience, my level of game knowledge, like all this like random crap, right? I get accepted into the game. So I'm thinking, oh man, this is gonna be awesome. First 20 minutes into the game, I realized that that wasn't gonna be the case. Right? And not to like knock on someone that has little experience GMing, because I've had some great sessions with first-time GMs, second-time GMs. That wasn't the case. But I was playing Halfling Bard. I don't remember the name or anything, but I'll give you the scenario of what happened. Right? We were entering like this sort of like cave structure with multiple tunnels. And apparently my character and another character, because there was 5 people playing, wanted to go in a direction that I now know after the fact the GM either 1, had no clue what was over there, or 2, it was going to mess up with the overall story arc, of us going in their direction. That's what I mean about adversarial GM taking someone's agency away. Instead of coming up with a creative solution in the narrative why we couldn't go there, this person literally did the one joke that everyone hears: a rock falls down, hits you in your head, you're unconscious. I mean, literally, it was the cave starts crumbling, a boulder, no roll required, a boulder hits you in your head, you're unconscious. I'm out of the game for like the next 45 minutes.
And that's what I'm saying.
That is the definition of adversarial GM to me.
No, that's the definition.
Agency away.
That's the definition of an asshole who didn't know what he was doing. But that's another story. Yeah, I mean, because I can give you an idea. An adversarial GM is our friend Eric Frankhouse. And not necessarily that say he's adversarial all the time, but like when me and Al played Warpaint, that was all about a bunch of competition. He threw challenges at us. It was awesome. We had a blast, but we understood when we sat down at the table what kind of game we were playing. There was enough history to go, okay, this is competitive. This is the da-da-da-da-da-da. We got it. Whereas, and even if a person is not, outright with what they are, you kind of know when you sit down and start playing. I'm of the mindset.
I mean, but that's adversarial without the negative connotation.
Right. But I'm saying,
if you just said Eric Frankhouse is an adversarial GM with no backstory or explanation, I think the majority of gamers will view it as you're saying Eric Frankhouse is not a good GM.
No, he's a great GM.
I could be wrong.
No, he's a great GM. That's my
I know that's not what you're saying, but I'm just saying that that's probably how it's viewed.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And that's why I want to give context, to that adversarial GM and having a good time with them versus what you just said was a guy who's unprepared, doesn't necessarily understand the game. Guess what? If I wanted you to go down a specific corridor and y'all chose the third one, but it was supposed to be the 5th one. So what? Guess what? The 3rd one is not a corridor I needed you to go down. It's not gonna, you know what I'm saying? Just adjust on the fly. You never had
any negative experiences?
Oh, I've had tons of negative experiences because I've had to deal with people like you're talking about. And and since we've talked about it, I don't look at them as necessarily adversarial anymore. Those are just nitwits. I had a guy one time in a game. It was funny as hell because he had it was supposed to be, what was the Harpers, and Forgotten Realms, the Harpers, and they worship Myliki and all of this. He had all this great backstory, and we were playing a bunch of chaotic characters. So he had this big beehive all set up, and we checked it out, and we basically said, made sure it had no magics on it or anything else. We're like, okay, fine. We're pouring oil all around this magic beehive. I mean, this beehive, and we're going to burn out all the bees. That way we don't have to deal with them. Then suddenly, guess what? These bees had a hive mind sentience all of a sudden, and they were able to cast a spell. They were able to actually use spellcraft. Remember spellcraft? They could use spellcraft and figure out the spell we were casting, and they counterspelled. Dude, come on.
The bees did this. Oh man, that's definitely a good point.
And I wouldn't say that either, Seth Maki. I would not say, oh, I'm sorry, Seth Mokami. I would not say that having heavy alignment restrictions counts as being adversarial, only in the sense that if it's noted from the beginning.
Oh shit! You know, it's funny you said that. I did that to Al. I guess I'm an adversarial GM.
Oh, when you first, yeah.
We were playing Hoard of the Dragon Queen, and Al was playing a paladin that was like killing everybody. So I took away his god and some of his godly powers because he was a murder freaking hobo.
I didn't know any better. That was my first time playing D&D. Really,
he was a murder hobo paladin. I don't think you did the wrong thing then. If he was being a murder hobo.
No, he was. Al would be the first to admit it.
I didn't know any better, yo. We at the table again. All right, so at this point in time, this was my only role playing experience, and we had who was at our table? We had Jason, who really liked to, I feel like, max min, and we had the rogue. We had Danny, both Dannys. Yeah. I feel like they both try to do the best like damage, whatever they could do. Yeah. So I'm sitting at a table with max minners, and people were worried about combat and stuff. So how could I not fall in line with that mindset when I'm fresh new to this stuff?
Oh, right. Yeah, and I'll even give you, we were doing Hoard of the Dragon Queen, right? And Alberto was playing a Dragonborn that followed, I forgot, it wasn't Tiamat, it was the goodly dragon.
Bahamut.
Yeah, Bahamut. And they ran into a village of lizard people that were following the same god as him, and the party was slaughtering them, and he was right along with them.
That's what they were doing. I had no indication that we shouldn't be doing that.
Claire makes a good point, and now I would call that being adversarial, though, Claire. You know, you see many a GM shut down players' ideas because it doesn't match their interpretation of morality. Yeah. I can see that becoming problematic.
But when you're playing in a system that uses alignment to describe someone's
motivations,
like if alignment's in the system, then either you have to agree at the beginning, hey, we're not using alignment, because I do agree. I'm not a big fan of morality and characters not being in the gray area. But if you're role playing a characters whose abilities are based on their alignment and tenets, then you have to follow that through, though.
Absolutely.
And to be fair, I was not upset about this. It was just the proper course of what happened for my actions.
And for the record, I wasn't a total asshole. He got it. He got his abilities back. It wasn't like he, played the rest of the game without them.
But no, that makes sense.
No holy magic.
I mean, that makes sense though. Like you said, the paladin he was doing unholy things, so he had to repent.
Yeah,
exactly.
He had to atone for his actions, which is cool. And you taught him something about the game. That's again, that's cool. Those are things that are kind of nice, especially like, I mean, I remember when I first started playing, my brother ran me through my first couple of games, and my other brother, like you said, he was playing a paladin. He had never played before, and it was the same thing. We're playing, and he's hacking people up, and my brother's like, "Wait a minute, dude, you got a alignment over here. You got to kind of follow these rules, this kind of stuff." So but it was a learning curve. It was a learning experience, as opposed to, you just being abused because, like Eric said, the GM isn't prepared, so he just pulls the rug out from under you on everything.
And I will say this though, you are right. It was a good learning experience and something I probably not think about like actively a lot, but it did shape my like thought process going into role-playing games past D&D, like the Cypher System. Like not every encounter you walk into is you're gonna have to slash and kill them. Like you can literally just ask them things, like talk to them. Yeah. And that's something I think about. Like hey, we went into this thing, this encounter, guns blazing for no reason when we could have just talked to them. Like, and I think about that a lot. Like it was a major learning. Yeah.
It shows. It also shows too, because I got to remember. Come on, I love going back to your story when you adjusted the guy's focus in Cypher System when he was playing a paladin-like character, and then he started doing like anti-paladin stuff. So you adjusted his focus, which was cool as hell. And
Seth Mokami who, by the way, we should have said this at the very beginning. Seth Mokami was the first person that actually brought up this conversation on the Cypher Unlimited Discord.
Yes, he was.
By asking a question. So thank you very much. Before I even say you, and I apologize for not saying that at the very beginning of the video, but he brought up a good point. He said my dad's group had hard rules on alignment back in the day. All good alignments and lawful neutral were the only ones allowed. You know what's funny? My group, when we first started, was exact opposite. Our GM had hard rules on alignment, so everyone started picking neutral characters, so you wouldn't get any of the. Like I'm playing a neutral bard. I'm playing. We actually went the opposite route. Like we don't want to get any of the any of the negatives from having an alignment problem. We all go neutral.
And my group was a group of but it was agreed upon. Everybody was basically chaotic. There was a bunch of chaotic good and chaotic neutral characters. Nobody really played evil characters back then. Unless we decided to have an evil party, but it was a lot of chaos. And yes, you are right. Chaotic neutral could very much be a problem in the hands of the wrong person.
Yeah, but that's why I hate alignments, because alignments like tell you, I mean, this is a different video for a different idea, but I hate alignments because alignments, like, there's no room for growth now for your either morality or personality, when you know at the very beginning of the game, this is the temperament of my character, and this is like the moral code that no one lives like that.
That's why descriptors, I think that's why the descriptor factors in Cypher System are much more becoming than the idea of an alignment.
Yeah. I was never a fan of alignments. But we've been beating this one to death. So let's move on to our next question, which this is actually, now we can actually talk about Cypher System, right? But what are some of the mechanics or safety valves inserted in modern games like the Cypher System that are there to help combat the us versus them mentality? Because I do think most modern games now have in-game rules or mechanics to help fight that ideology.
Well, the one big ideology that we can throw out there would be player agency, the idea of player intrusions, the idea of GM intrusions versus, in the way it's explained, the way GM intrusions are explained, number one, and definitely what a player intrusion allows players to do, giving them control within inside the narrative itself, and the basic philosophy of the game itself, is a story versus, the next combat.
And well, just to piggyback a little bit off that, again, you guys know I haven't played many systems outside of Cypher System, but something that Cypher System did, I guess specifically for me, that kind of helped remove that mindset was the stats and whatnot aren't as in depth. You aren't worrying about all these different stats, all these different spells. It's a little more loose. It's rules light is what it's we call it, or what it's called. And that sort of rules light kind of opens your mind to more possibilities than just, hey, I'm just stringing them from combat to combat. It gives that more of a storytelling feel than a us versus them. Like, hey, we're here to progress a story along, not just for me to throw bad guys at you to beat them up and we rinse and repeat.
Yeah, I think a lot of systems, not only Cypher System, I think a ton of systems, I think Savage World have mechanics that actually help with this. I think Fate has mechanics that actually help with this. Any
Vortex Prime is actually real quick.
Hold on a sec, Dean, let me finish. What you call it, but Cypher System specifically, it's a shared narrative, right? So player intrusions, group intrusions, GM intrusions, player intrusions are designed to have the narrative bounce back and forth, so agency isn't controlled by one person for too long. So I think that's definitely a mechanic that's designed to get rid of the adversarial mindset. But I also think effort and edge are mechanics that fight against specifically effort, not so much edge, but specifically effort, because if a GM wants to challenge you and or not necessarily challenge you, wants to prevent you from succeeding, they're going to come up with a large target number, right? But the player has in their back pocket, hey, I'm 3rd level. I have 3 levels of effort. I'll blow my points. I'm going to succeed at this, regardless of how hard you're making it for me. You know what I mean? It gives the player another tool to combat that I'm giving you an impossible task that you can't do. You know, so I think that's another mechanic that actually helps with, you know, adversarial gameplay.
Well, and what I was saying along that same line, and I agree 100%. But I think it's also like in a lot of games, it's in the baseline description. You know, they tell you to let the player, you know, a lot of games will tell you to let the players be the star of the story. You know, it's I think by embracing that kind of concept along with, you know, like Cypher, you don't get experience points from killing monsters. That's normally not the way it's set up. You know, it's achieving goals. You know, Numenera, it was discovery. You know, Destiny, it's building new cities and, you know, building tomorrow, you know. So when you change the focus of what the game is about as well, you know, those concepts are become built in as well.
Dean, that's a phenomenal point as well. When you emphasize, if your game emphasizes something other than combat and something other than life and death, it actually dramatically changes the actual you know, when you're focusing on discovery or focusing on whatever it is your system is, you know, focusing on other than combat, it changes the overall group's table like mindset. So it moves them away from us against you or us against them if your focus isn't on combat most of the time. That's a great point. And, you know, Numenera is basically a discovery game.
That's what I said. Numenera's discovery, Numenera Destiny, you know, that's rebuilding the world, you know, and you know, even with Cypher System, the fact that they built in, that's another one that moves you away from the adversarial DM is character arcs. Character arcs are huge because, again, that as a GM, that kind of puts you in the sense of, okay, how am I going to help them accomplish? You know, what am I gonna put in their path for them to accomplish their character arcs? And that could become the basis of your story for your entire adventure. How
you know, even 5e tried that with traits.
Yeah, they tried it and left it by the wayside.
I don't necessarily think that. Like, I think 5e is nowhere near as adversarial as the early editions. I think it's.
Oh no, it's not at all. I mean, I'm just saying that it's still what it is. It comes from where it came from. I mean, when you look at a game, because I can say like a game where I was going to say when you're talking about built-in rules, Cortex Prime. Cortex Prime is a crunchy game. It has a lot of moving parts, but the moving parts are all designed to support the narrative. They're designed to tell a more story-oriented game, you know, and give you the ability to do it through in-game mechanics versus.
You know, I like that concept, that idea of a GM will be less adversarial if you telling them what's important for the characters before the game even started in character creation. Like, because now it's no longer, hey, it's only my narrative. I have to incorporate what these characters, or what's important to these characters. You know, the GM has that information beforehand. So it's sort of like subliminally changes, like makes like tweaks to their mindset if they have that information beforehand. And you know, that's in the game design itself. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, you know, and see, I never even thought about it, but for years, you know, if I know I'm going to run a campaign I'd say for at least the last 30 years, I always ask my players, give me a background story. Give me a page, you know, at least a page of background information, you know, and I don't know where the idea or the concept came for me to start incorporating pieces of the characters' histories into the game itself. But it was like, why, you know, I know what it was. I wanted to get away from the old, you meet in the tavern. You know, I needed to find a way to have the characters motivated to be out and doing these things together. So, you know, I would get their background stories and then I would, you know, do my whole thing, connections. And that's what I love about Cypher. Is, like you said, it's all in there. Character
Dean,
connections.
after you finish your thought, we have two great questions being asked in chat. You want to ask these?
Sure, hit the first one.
All right, what you call it? I'm going blind, but it's, how do you pronounce that, Al? The first.
Wait, what are you? I'll just read the sentence, the question. So this is from Seth Makami. They ask, do y'all think Monte Cooke's experience with earlier editions of D&D affected the story-focused nature of Cypher?
Absolutely.
I think it was the reverse. I think Monte working on 5th edition brought his narrative elements into 5th edition.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I think Monte's work throughout the history of his game career, if you look at what he was doing, you know, it's the reason why we had Arcana Unearthed, you know, which birthed the Diamond Throne. That's why he, at that time, Monte Cooke had 2 alternate, well, 3 actually, alternate players' handbooks out. There was, you know, Iron Heroes, there was Arcana Unearthed, and then there was Arcana Evolved, you know, all came out, which were evolutions or variants on the player's handbook. And they introduced, like Anthony was saying, traits. They introduced backgrounds. They introduced lots of different mechanical tools to try and encourage you to tell a different kind of story or be a different kind of DM at the time. So I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, I think like once again we're not, none of us are in the Monte's head or whatever, but I think he was more influenced by what the indie game movement was doing and brought some of those elements into traditional RPGs. Like, and then when he had the opportunity to make his own stuff, he went, I'm gonna move away from this, heavily rule-based, and I'm gonna go in a more of a narrative direction. But if you look at, like, it's like what Dean said, if you look at like a lot of the designs he did do for Wizards of the Coast, it had more of a narrative like lead on it. But I think he was influenced by the indie movement and what they were doing in the indie games.
That I can say that, see that as well. So Eric, you said you think we're using the term we're using.
No, hold on. Let's answer the 2 questions, Dean.
Yeah. So next question, I'll read it here.
I'm sorry, I forgot that.
People are already discussing in the chat, which is cool. Yeah. But the next question here is, does the use of a GM screen serve to encourage adversarial GMing because it's a wall between players and GM? I think it really depends on how you use it. I think it depends how you use it. I think it depends how you use it.
Yeah, I'm gonna get all New York on you. Fuck yeah. I'm not a fan of GM screens. GM screens just mentally tells you, hey, look, there's a division between me and the table. Even when I wasn't playing like a narrative games, I hated that concept of GM screens. It's like creating this barrier between you and the table. Yeah, I am not a fan of GM screens. I never was. I love the format MCG uses.
See, I tend to disagree only because that's not never been my mindset with a GM screen. The GM screen was for information. It was for me, it was quick access. No, I'm saying me personally. I'm not saying anybody else. Me personally, it was quick access to information. And it was also a place that I could leave stuff just stacked, my notebook open, and I didn't have to worry about players peeking to see what I had written down. Now, with the inception
that right there is adversarial, worrying about whether the players are peeking on your notes.
Well, no, you don't want you to peek on the notes because I don't want to ruin the surprises.
Yeah, like the twist. You don't want them to see the twist coming. Some people write down their storylines. We're not. I mean, I know me and you, Anthony, we don't write down these things, but some people do write these like
and that's what I'm saying. And
revelations in there.
That's from back in the day.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I just never liked that feeling. I never liked.
But again, I was saying that was back in the day. Now, with the inception of PDFs and tablets and stuff, I have my tablet sitting there, so I have everything there. or I have my computer. Everything is there. So now I don't kind of worry about it. I don't feel, and the table is open. So I do dig that. It gives that embracing the table aspect. So I really think it depends on the person and the people at the table.
Yeah, me personally, I'm not trying to argue how useful a GM screen is. I just don't like the feeling it gives me, which like it's not a legitimate debatable argument. I'm just saying, I just don't like the feeling of separation it gives me on either side of the screen.
Separation anxiety, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's really it really boils down to comfortability. Again, some people just, even if the GM isn't doing anything secret behind the screen, just having it there creates that feeling of, hey, we're not playing this together, we're separate, like this is you versus us. And just putting that down, if it can be blank and you're rolling in front of them, it could be literally serving no purpose other than being on the table, it creates that mindset immediately. Or at least I think so too. But that is not to say that it is useful.
That need a screen no matter what.
It is useful though, for like, if like Dean was saying, for information. Like if you don't have a tablet, if you don't have something like on your phone pulled up, like that's not available, having a GM screen maybe off to the side with that information would be good, because you're not blocking anything, maybe a little bit less separation. But it's invaluable to have quick access to information. And this harks back more to earlier days when there really wasn't a digital version that you could just have flat on your table. It was just a product of the times, I think.
And let's just be realistic too. It harks back to early days because there were a lot more rules and stat blocks and all that was important.
Well, and Eric did make a good point. He said it can be considered adversarial when there's no information on the other side for players. That's true. I can agree with that. But in the same breath, I knew some games that did have information on both sides, stuff for the players and stuff for the GM on the opposite side. But in other cases, you know what? What information did players need back in the good old days of D&D? All your information was on your character sheet. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Yeah. And it's truthfully, it said, it's how you use the product. It's how you use it. Is it a tool to you, or is it literally a barrier? Are you
down with DM screens? Burn them down.
But wait a minute, you saying that? But you get a brand new one in the mail soon.
Yeah. Burn all of them except for the ones I own.
Hypocrite. Oh, but this has been an awesome discussion. Yeah, I just want to chime in to say that.
I agree with Claire. Tear down those screens.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, but just to finish touching on the whole mechanics thing, because we kind of had a huge aside there. One last thing I will say about the mechanics for Cypher System specifically, because it wasn't mentioned specifically, was minor and major effects. Those also, this was before player intrusions. The players had a chance to input in the story just by rolling well. And that, again, lends away from that adversary because they have input already just by rolling decently.
Yeah, and
that's actually a great point, Al.
And I have to say something else too. You made me think about it. We were talking about GM intrusions initially in the original Cypher System, original Numenera. There were no player intrusions, but the idea behind even how they presented to you a GM intrusion, it wasn't a negative thing. It wasn't something to provoke the ire of the players. It was supposed to be a complication in the story, a kink in the machine. So I think those things also made it a cool thing, as to alleviate that adversarial nature.
Yep. And Claire brings up a good point too, that the ability to, like, even just the ability to refuse a GM intrusion with an XP was sort of like a player intrusion light, and it also, that mechanic in itself helps like lead away from that adversarial, because you can even just say, hey, I don't want to deal with that challenge you're presenting me. Here's my XP. It's a mechanic that's built in. You can just say, no obstacles right now, please. Thank you. And give that XP. Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, but I think the person that creates obstacles without giving it it as a GM intrusion, because all obstacles don't have to be GM intrusion, get miscorrectly cast as an adversarial GM. Because
good.
You know, it's like, oh, they're doing this and they didn't offer intrusion. I don't always have to create an obstacle with a reward behind it.
I don't care.
I mean?
As long as as long as the obstacle is adding to the narrative, I don't care whether I get offered an XP or not. And that's me personally.
I mean, so that, oh, I'm sorry, D, go ahead.
I'm just saying that's me personally. Now, if it's, you know, if it's a situation that is gonna cause, you know, major league problems or something, okay, I might offer it. But for the most part, let's do it. Let's just have a good game.
I mean, so this leads us to our last, you know, what's your final thoughts on this gameplay style, or on adversarial GMing for that matter, you know, period. And do you think we missed anything?
Well, firstly, Eric already said this in the chat. I think after this discussion, we found that I feel like we're using the word wrong or the labels incorrect or something. We need two terms basically or something. One for where it's like agreed upon, where it's like everyone's all in this together, adversarial type. Because that's where I thought of, like Eric's a perfect example of an adversarial type GM where they're putting out challenges, but it's all, you know, it's all agreed upon. Everyone's on the same page. Right. Whereas we have this jerk of a GM who's just doing it to be an asshole. That's, in my opinion, that's not an adversarial GM. That's just that's a guy being a jerk, an asshole. That's not the same thing. I feel like we might need another term. We could just call them assholes, whatever. But it's not. That's not an adversarial GM in my eyes. That's just someone being a dickhead.
Right. Like, so that's what it is. That's the new term. We got dickhead GM and we got adversarial GM. Adversarial GMs, by their very nature, are not. It's not a bad thing, especially if it's agreed upon at your table. So, you know, piggybacking on what you said, Al, final thoughts. It's nothing wrong with it when it's agreed upon, or it's even, you know, not even necessarily agreed upon, but you know what you're getting into when you walk through the door. You know, some of us know our GMs that we're going to play with. Some of us don't. It is what it is. Do I think we missed anything? We may have. You know, somebody's going to tell us in the chat. So, you know, we'll have to address it later.
Jason C put a good name for it too, antagonizing GM.
I feel like that has a lot more of a negative connotation than adversarial, yeah.
I think your guys pretty nailed it. I think the term adversarial GM gets used way too much and out of context. But I think the one thing that I got out of this that I didn't really think about before is that being a dick, right? or doing something like to take away someone's agency, I think it's more the definition that I'm going to now call an adversarial GM. Has nothing to do with the old style of gaming, but if you're an agency hog as a GM, that's going to be my definition going forward.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So then you would be using what I would call the negative version of the adversarial GM. Yeah. Because yeah, in my eyes, adversarial means up for a challenge. Like everybody's up for a challenge, whereas where you're talking about taking away the agency, all that stuff.
Yeah, but I think inherently the tag adversarial GM was a negative connotation.
See, this is where my age shows, because I'm only learning it through this stuff. And again, I went first, literally when the first,
that was sort of like an insult in the 80s.
It was an insult back. I mean, when things started to shift, especially when things started to shift to a lot of the indie games, the more narrative style, people talking about role playing more than just role playing, adversarial GM became a negative connotation. It became an insult, you know, and where truth be told, if we want to say adversarial and we're talking about it from its roots, its history, that's not a bad thing. That's just a style of play that was existent. That's what a lot of people learned. Hey, that's what I cut my teeth on. You know,
me too.
Some people don't evolve from it. Some people do. Some people, you know, progress. I know I got a couple of friends, they have played nothing but AD&D for the last 40 plus years. I cannot get them to play another game. If I want to hang out and game with them, I'm playing AD&D. I'm not playing third edition. I'm not playing 3.5. I get no Pathfinder. I can't get him to play Cypher. Nothing.
Hey, our friend Jason, before he passed, all he played was GURPS. It was
See?
like pulling teeth just to get him to play 5th edition. And he was playing GURPS for 20 years.
That's what I'm saying. See, so you got some people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love playing with those guys. When I get the opportunity to go play and we hang out, okay, I know I got to dig out some old AD&D characters and get in that mindset. It's a blast. But in the same breath, I know what I enjoy. I know the type of game master I want to be. I like the eclectic nature of playing tons of different games and reading different stuff and getting perspectives and so on and so forth. You know, I only get better as far as I'm concerned.
If we messed anything up, because I'm sure we did, or if you disagree with us, or you want to, you know, fight to the death to defend your GM screen, because I'm coming to burn it down. You know, put it in the chat section down below, the YouTube channel. Let us know if you agree with us or disagreed. You know, I'm curious to see what everyone has to say. Yeah, once again, we're not experts. We're just a bunch of idiots that like to chat about gaming. So let us know what your opinions are. They're probably more cohesive and valid than ours. So it's all good. Put it in the chat.
See, and I'm going to tell you like this. I'm going to be on the other side helping your people protect your GM screens. It's going to be a civil war like in the comic books between Spigs and Alpha Dean, you know, because I'm not embracing the idiot title either. I'm just the guy who likes to talk about gaming.
I don't know. I think me and Claire could take y'all.
Hey, let's do it. I'm big enough.
Oh,
Guns, boy.
either way, this has been a fantastic talk. And Anthony, I think you have something to tell the people.
Yep. If you like us and you like what we do, please join the Cypher Unlimited Discord. We have the largest fan-run Discord out there, close to 4,000 members. Please just head on over there. We chat things, all things Monte Cooke games. If you want to get in the game, you want to talk about gaming, just please go there. And it's a great place to chat with us, and pretty much everyone that's in our Twitch chat, you can talk with them as well, or join our Facebook group. It's not quite as big as our Discord, but the same conversations are happening there as well. Or give us a little donation on Ko-fi. Our videos will always be free, but it helps out with every little thing like Zoom costs. Or go to the Cypher Unlimited store and pick up some cool Cypher Unlimited merch like this hat I got on. Like I said, we'll greatly appreciate it. You'd be the coolest kid on the block if you do. Like, share, and subscribe our videos on YouTube. We're really trying to get our subscription count up there, and we really appreciate if you help us out there. Or give us a follow on Twitch, or sub on Twitch if you can. If you can't, that's okay too. We'll still love you. And last but not least, we love you guys.
Yeah, so again, thank you guys so much for stopping by. This is a fantastic discussion. I'll be on YouTube tomorrow for those who missed it or didn't catch the beginning. And yeah, we love you guys, and from us at the CU, we will see you later.